It's a program of Jewish information, inspiration, motivation, and transformation here on the Gavriel Sanders Show.
Welcome again to the Gavriel Sanders Show. I am Gavriel, your host for the next 28 minutes. In this program, we'll lead off with Rabbi Yitzchak Meir Goodman's comments on Sukkot. Then I'll present a short interview I did on the Ben Mulroney Show out of Canada. Following that, we present the final installment in our long study of the history of the Holocaust with Rabbi Nosson Scherman of ArtScroll. And I'll have some closing comments as well. But let's get started with Torah insights on the holiday of Sukkot. Rabbi Goodman, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Gavriel. Shalom, listeners across the planet. I'd like to talk a little bit about Sukkot and the whole cycle of our calendar. The Yom Tov of Pesach is called the Chag Ha'oviv and the Chodesh Ha'oviv, the springtime. Sukkot is referred to in the Torah as Chag Ha'osif, the Yom Tov of the ingathering. I've seen Svarim, especially in the Hasidic world, a little Kabbalistic, that discuss human life on earth. In a certain way, they say, Pesach represents birth. Chag Ha'oviv is springtime. Our cycle begins with Pesach. The nation is born. The person sees himself as being born. Then he goes to Shavuos, Matan Torah, just like the child grows up, and in his formative years, he acquires his Torah. Presumably, hopefully, in his teen years, he has mastered enough to be a good Jew. Then he goes through life. And the summertime would represent the beauty of life and the enticements that nature provides in the beautiful weather. And then comes, towards the end, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, repenting for days wasted, maybe months or years wasted. And then comes Sukkot, Chag Ha'osif, the holiday of the ingathering. The neshamas are getting ready to meet up with their maker. And then comes Shmini Atzeres, the special day where Hashem says, Ikvu, give me one special day, just me and you, so to speak, God and the Jewish people. To the individual, it represents just me and you, God, at the Kisiyah covered in the holiday of ingathering. I'm being gathered back to my people, I'm being gathered up to the other world, and now I have to give an accounting. What did I do? Since that Chag Ha'oviv, since the time in the spring when I was born, went through my life cycle, did my tshuva, was it sincere, was it not? Here I am, I'm being ingathered to my God. That's the way I saw it in some Svarim, and it's a very interesting thought to think about, because it comes out that the years of our life are the summertime, the beautiful days, the nice weather, and the great many enticements that come to us. How do we spend our time? For that matter, how do we spend our summer vacations? Are we preparing for Rosh Hashanah, for Yom Kippur? Are we preparing for Chag HaSukkos and Chag Ha'osif? The Rambam writes, a person should always strive, whenever he is, any time of the year, to always be in a matzav of tshuva, because you never know when the day is coming. When is your day of ingathering? We know, unfortunately, from so many events in history and in modern history, and what's going on in the world around us today, that a person wakes up in the morning and does not know if he'll be home at night. He can be on a bus in Eretz Yisrael. He can be in a high tower in New York. He never knows. Every single day we have to be prepared. We have to prepare for Chag Ha'osif, for the ingathering. May we have a great year this year. May everybody reach a madrega on a level that they really are comfortable and happy about, and know that anytime they are called, they can give a good accounting of their lives. Shalom.
You're tuned to the Gavriel Sanders Show, broadcasting on WNEW 102.7 FM HD3 New York and around the world on TalklineNetwork.com.
So the Friday after Yom Kippur, I was interviewed by Canadian conservative commentator Ben Mulroney. Millions of Canadians follow his radio and podcast programming. We had a short 7.5-minute conversation about the Manchester shooting and other topics unfolding between Gaza and Israel. And here's that interview as recorded on my side.
Now in this segment, we're going to zoom out and we're going to look at Canada's role in the world, Canada's role in this dynamic with Israel and Gaza and the Palestinian people. And for that, we're joined by Gavriel Sanders, spokesperson for the Be a Mensch Foundation. Thank you so much for being here.
It's very great to be with you. I'm a fan.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the question that I have in my mind, and I think this is a good launching point, is has our inaction or has our permissiveness for a certain type of protest and a certain type of anger, has that led to the situation that we saw unfold in Manchester?
Could you give me a little bit more coloration behind your question?
I sit around and I watch what's happened on the streets of Toronto. And I remember very early after October 7th, I suggested on social media that if the police don't escalate by arresting people, then the protesters will escalate by increasing their rhetoric and eventually perhaps even moving into violence. The police have not necessarily moved into a place where they are forcing accountability on the protesters. And so what we've seen is more and more emboldened protesters. And I wonder whether that progression can lead to what we saw in Manchester.
And we just had a case of it here in the lower 48 with what happened with Charlie Kirk of blessed memory. That was an example of what you're talking about reflected in Manchester, that continuous and upscaled political rhetoric eventually bleeds into action. And bleeding is the operative word here. Yeah, absolutely. And my fear is that we have given up, at least on the streets of North America. There's no dialogue. There is shouting, and there is protest, and there's chants, and there's slogans, but there is no dialogue in any meaningful way amongst the citizenry. And I don't know how we move forward if the people of a country can't even talk to each other. Ben, this is not new on the historical stage. If we go back 90 years, 85 years, there was a German propagandist by the name of Goebbels who skillfully set the stage for what eventually led to the Holocaust itself, and particularly its emphasis on Jews. Not only Jews, but particularly numerically, that was the biggest slice of the pie of elimination. And so it's called The Big Lie. And in the book that we might talk about called Extreme Trauma, we focus on that there's a grooming, let's call it, a psychological grooming of the public that's done very systematically and gradually. Anybody who's read the book by Saul Alinsky, The Rules for Radicals, which Hillary Clinton said he was one of her heroes, by the way. Anybody who's read Rules for Radicals can see how this is happening, not randomly. There's a pattern to this to anybody who understands the deep structure of how you bring about change in a society. And it's my belief, shared with many other people. I'm not sure where you stand on this, but my belief is that we're watching the slow erosion of a culture. I
agree. I co-sign that with you. I wanted, though, talk about perhaps hope in this war, and hope in the person of Donald Trump and his peace plan, his peace proposal. I wonder what your thoughts are on whether or not this thing is going to find purchase.
Okay, so that's a great question, and it's one that I have a few different angles that we can look at, and we can do this dialogically. But I have to set a backdrop to this. What's going on in Gaza, and I'm a resident of Jerusalem. I happen to be in New York at the moment for a while, but I live in Jerusalem. I was there for the Iran war. I've been there with the sirens going continuously. I have red alerts on my phone that go off even here. And so I'm very well aware of what's happened, especially since October 7th. Let me give the bottom line first. The ultimate aim on the non-Israeli side, and so I'll include some of the nations of the world in this as well, is not peace with Israel, but every piece of Israel. Okay, let that register. That's the end game. And it's not a political aspiration. It's a theological ideology. Now, why do I say that? I've read the Hamas Charter, the one from 1988, and the revision from 2017, where the language was softened, so it's a different rhetoric, but still the same game. Any land anywhere has been conquered by Islam. It's considered Islamic Holy Land. It's a trust called Waqf in Arabic, W-A-Q-F. If it happens to fall back into the hands of somebody else, it's an Islamic duty through the mechanism of jihad to take it back. So the idea that there could be, you've heard this, every American administration said this, 2 states for 2 people living side by side in peace. And it's great if you smoke enough dope, but that's not the end game. Now, there was a conference in Khartoum, Sudan, many years ago, where they adopted something called phased strategies. They said, we can't beat them militarily, but we'll take it like the camel nosing through into the tent. And that's what's going on here. Now, more rockets were fired on Israel from Gaza since October 7th than all the time since Hamas rose to ascendancy in that region, which was Judenrein, free of Jews. I've been to Gaza in 2005, 2 months before the turnback. It was gorgeous what they did there. The jobs they provided. It was an amazing place. And all that, of course, is ruined. I'll say this closing thing, and then I'd love your feedback. People need to understand, and in the West we don't because we're not spiritually oriented so much, at least not at the governing level. We're rather, I call us practical atheists, all right? So we live life, there is no value system, everything's kind of nihilistic. And that doesn't work for society building. That was Charlie Kirk's whole message, was to impart values, especially to a young generation that's had it stripped away. And that's another source. Talk about Qatar and education. I just want people to understand that in order to understand, you have to read their sources. They're available in English. Read the PA Charter, read the Hamas Charter, both versions of it, and you come to the conclusion that they can't make peace with Israel. There's no possible way to do that because they lose face. And that is a big issue in a shame-based society like Islamic culture.
I only have a couple of minutes left, Gavriel, but the Palestinian people are not Hamas, and Hamas is not the Palestinian people. And at various times one has endorsed the other, but I think is there a path forward where Hamas goes the way of the dodo bird and then peace can be achieved with some other governing force?
It would require an amazingly creative, brave shift from values that had been part of the education system. It's even in the UNRWA textbooks that Jews are the sons of pigs and monkeys and that we have to kill them. And the best thing you could do is raise your child to be a martyr. And so many Arab mothers say they want their kids to be a martyr. It'll take a generation for that to change with some very serious reworking. Look what happened in Germany. Look what happened in Japan. You have to go back to those.
Yeah. You're right. One thing that I pointed out is shocked at how empowered we've allowed Hamas to be in these peace negotiations. This is, as far as I'm concerned, we should be organizing their terms of surrender because this is not an agreement between equals. There's a victor and there's the vanquished. We're going to have to leave it there, Gavriel. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My honor, my pleasure. Thank you, Ben. All the best. So I want to talk to Jewish college students for a minute, or their parents. You've seen what's happening on campus, anti-Semitism, misinformation, and people who think they know something about Israel because they saw a meme. Well, here's the move. Go live it. Spend a semester in Israel, not just talking about it, but actually living in Israel. Experience the vibe of Jerusalem's old city. Share the empowerment of being part of a Jewish majority, maybe for the first time. As the Masa organization says, 4 to 5 months in Israel will forever enrich your Jewish life and identity. And here's the bonus. From Israel, weekend trips to Prague, Paris, London, Dubai, even Greece are faster and cheaper than traveling from the U.S. Plus, your academic calendar runs on the Jewish calendar. No classes, no tests, no conflicts on Jewish holidays. You'll come home not just inspired, but equipped, ready to answer ignorance with insight, because you've lived the story. It's your Jewish future, so learn it, live it, and lead it from Israel. I'd like you to visit jewishyearabroad.org and turn experience into conviction. That's jewishyearabroad.org.
This is Rabbi Mordechai Becher, and you're listening to the Gavriel Sanders Show.
We conclude a more than 30-segment presentation on the history of the Holocaust with Rabbi Nosson Scherman of ArtScroll. If you follow our program here on the Talkline Network, then I hope you found it soberingly memorable and insightful. Here's Rabbi Scherman.
Then came the Communist Revolution. The Communists insisted that there could be no difference between minorities and majorities, between one religion and the other. And so for the first time, Jews had freedom. Jews had equality. And therefore Jews in Russia became, by and large, with exceptions of course, but by and large, they became great supporters of the communist regime. The Torah leaders in Russia recognized the danger in the Bolshevik Revolution because the communists in Russia did not only want equality for all religions, they wanted to abolish all religions. They believed in no religion. And so the leadership of the Communist Party wanted to do away with shuls, close up the shuls, close up the yeshivas, see to it that even if the older people could not be weaned away from their religion, but at least the younger generation would be torn away from Yiddishkeit. And as a result, we find not only shuls being closed, but we find during the late 1920s, there were mass arrests of Rabbonim in Russia. Many Rabbonim were sent to Siberia where they suffered terribly. Others left the country. We find many, many proclamations, letters, public appeals newspaper articles by Reb Chaim Ozer and the Chofetz Chaim. It was their greatest preoccupation during all of this time, thinking constantly about the Jews of Russia. And it's very important for us to realize that Russia had been the hotbed of Torah Yiddishkeit in Europe for probably 2 centuries. There was Russia itself, and there was the part of Poland which belonged to Russia. It was there that Hasidus was strong. It was there that the yeshivas were strong. It was there that the shtetl was strong. Small towns where Jews lived as they and as their ancestors had lived for centuries, with tenacious loyalty to Torah. Lenin, the father of the communist revolution, was an opponent of anti-Semitism. He felt that with the new social order, the problems of the Jews would disappear along with the problems of all of the other people. However, he insisted that Jews would have to undergo a very radical transformation, more than any other element in Russia. He insisted that they stop being Jews and they become Russians. The history of the rest of the period is sadly too well known. Lenin died, Stalin succeeded him, Stalin was a vicious anti-Semite. And what's more, the Yevsektia, the Jewish leadership in the Communist Party itself, tried to prove that they were more Russians than the Russians, more communists than the communists, and they took the lead in trying to destroy the last semblance of Yiddishkeit in Russia. Immediately after World War I, there was a series of border wars between Russia and Poland, between Poland and Lithuania, as we've seen earlier. During these wars, thousands of Jews were killed in pogroms, hundreds of thousands were robbed and made homeless. And a major force in these murders was the army of the Ukrainian Democratic Republic. They perpetrated bloodbaths in as many as 500 different places. And the justification was that the Jews were friends of the communists, and the communists were enemies of everyone. We'll see later, as we discuss the tales of German murders of Jews, that their most loyal allies were the Ukrainians. In other countries, let's talk now about Romania. Romania was a country with a long, long tradition of its own anti-Semitism. Following World War I, Romania gobbled up new provinces, Bukovina, Bessarabia, and Transylvania, and as a result, hundreds of thousands of Jews came under the government of Romania. The government wanted to prevent these Jews from becoming citizens, wanted to prevent them from having full rights of citizenship. The Versailles Peace Treaty, the Allied powers, after World War I, insisted that every country in Europe give political rights not only to Jews but to all minority groups. And Romania was forced to adopt laws which would give these rights to Jews. However, the Romanian government after the war did very little to enforce these treaty provisions. In Bukovina, for example, 40,000 Jews were refused citizenship on the pretext that they were refugees who had only recently come into the country and therefore were not covered by the Treaty of Versailles. Provisions were added to the Constitution which made it impossible, which made it illegal for Jews to serve in civil service, to be judges, or to work in universities, or to be officers in the army. Students at the 4 universities in the country wanted quota systems to be imposed to prevent Jews from coming into the universities. And in 1927, a new political organization was formed, originally called the Archangel Michael League. Later, in 1929, became known as the Iron Guard. And it was a paramilitary organization, something like the brown shirts and the black shirts in Germany, which had an extreme anti-Semitic program. And this organization, the Iron Guard, was actually supported not only morally but financially, by the government. They received subsidies from the Ministry of the Interior, and very early in its history, in the history of the Iron Guard, they were holding a conference in a town in Transylvania, paid for by the government, and they carried out a pogrom. 5 shuls were wrecked. Sifrei Torah, Rachmana litzlan, were burned in the public squares. And these riots spread all over the country. In the city of Cluj, 8 shuls were destroyed. And they did the same thing in other cities too. At the end of 1933, the Iron Guard was officially disbanded by the liberal prime minister of the time. But this sort of anti-Semitic feeling and agitation remained in the country, just remained undercover for a while. After Hitler came to power, the large Romanian political parties also adopted anti-Semitic programs. As we've seen in our discussion of anti-Semitism in Germany, once you have anti-Semitism as an official program, and once the government comes to power with that as its platform, then it becomes respectable. We've seen how in Germany, once the proposition was made and publicized that the Jews were not real human beings, then it became acceptable behavior to attack Jews in the streets, to rob their businesses, to burn their homes, to destroy their shuls. And so the same thing was happening in Hungary. You had a political party which demanded nationalization of the cities, proportional representation in public and private posts in schools and universities, and revocation of Jewish citizenship. Now, if the Jews are not citizens, then they're not entitled to any of the rights of citizens. In 1935, 1936, as a result of this terror campaign, there were very few Jewish students left in the universities. Romanian banks would not give credit to Jewish banks. Jewish businesses had extra taxes, and these taxes were imposed on them in order to ruin them. Jewish firms were not given quotas to import raw materials and goods. Meanwhile, German propaganda was flooding the country, and the result was that Jews began suffering not only deprivation of rights, but also extreme economic hardship and physical hardship, as their safety could no longer be guaranteed.
This is Susie Fishbein from Kosher by Design, and you are listening to Gavriel.
Let's be honest. Even if the hostages are released this week, as we all hope, every man, woman, Israeli, foreigner, a couple of Americans, even if they're all released, the conflict isn't over. The global cries for intifada aren't tied to negotiations or humanitarian gestures. They're rooted in an ideology that celebrates violence as virtue and martyrdom as policy. It's a toxic theme, one that's spread through campuses, social media, and the unguarded minds of hundreds of millions who've never opened a map, never read the Hamas Charter, and never asked who really wants peace. That's why now, more than ever, I keep urging Jewish college students to invest in real education, the kind you only get by living in Israel. Spend a semester at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Join one of the accredited programs through Jewish Year Abroad. Because the future advocates for truth, for Israel, and for Jewish continuity are being shaped right now, not on Twitter feeds, but in classrooms that stand on the soil of our history. I'm personally involved with several significant initiatives that make it easier and more affordable for students to study in Israel, whether for a single semester or an entire degree. Every student who goes comes back changed, stronger, informed, I'd say unshakable. And they need to be, because Hamas's own founding document, Article 13 of its charter, makes it crystal clear. There is no solution for the Palestinian question except through jihad. Article 11 declares all of historic Palestine, that's the whole necktie, to be an Islamic waqf, as we talked about earlier, sacred property that cannot be surrendered. In other words, no peace agreement, no negotiation, no recognition of Israel's right to exist will ever satisfy that ideology. Israel has made the hard concessions. It withdrew from Gaza, 2005. It offered land. It took risks. Every time those gestures were answered with rockets, tunnels, and terror. The Palestinian leadership, whether under Hamas or the PLO, has broken every serious peace agreement it ever signed. Every one. So yes, if the hostages are released, we'll rejoice, we'll pray, we'll mourn the dead, and we'll bless the living. But let's not kid ourselves. Hamas has lost face in the Arab world, and it will seek to regain it through more violence, more manipulation, more headlines designed to make Israel look like the aggressor. And there's a deeper danger here. What we're watching unfold today through the channels of politics, education, and mainstream media is basically the same strategy that Joseph Goebbels mastered in pre-Holocaust Germany, turning lies into headlines, headlines into doctrine, and doctrine into hate. When propaganda becomes normalized, moral confusion follows, and history has shown us where that leads. That's why we have to be smarter and louder with truth. Education isn't just a privilege, it's a defense system. And moral clarity is now as vital as military strength. That's why for months I've been urging you, get a copy of the book Extreme Trauma, October 7th is an Outlier in Human Potential. It's on Amazon. Read it, discuss it, gift it to a college student. Because while others are weaponizing lies, we have to arm our minds with truth. The truth of what happened, the truth of why it happened, and the truth of how we respond with dignity, unity, and strength. If you want to make a real difference, go study in Israel. Walk the land, learn the language, see the reality. And come home ready to defend what's right, not from anger, but from understanding. This is our moment to lead with conviction, and conviction begins with knowledge. This is Gavriel Sanders thanking you for listening, thanking you for being part of this effort to make a difference in our world today. I wish you a wonderful, truly, as we say in the Mamaloshen, Simchadik celebration of Sukkot, and we'll talk to you next time. Bezrat Hashem. Our thanks today to executive producer Zev Brenner of the Talkline Network, to Erin Michelle for her voiceover talent, and to Audionautics for our intro-outro music. Take what you've heard today and go make the difference only you can. Till next week, Kol Tuv.
This program showcases people, organizations, and opportunities for making a difference. Tune in next week for another freshly baked edition of the Gavriel Sanders Show. You can reach Gavriel at gavrielradio@gmail.com. That's GAVRIEL radio@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.